welcome back everybody to episode 9 of our series of the Knights Templar. We're approaching the final episodes of this series. In the meantime, in this episode we will see how is the situation in the Middle East so far, what have the Templars accomplished, and how are they viewed, of course, in Europe. Somehow people start losing faith due to the action of a few Templar masters, because they will do something that will change their perception among the Crusader states and the soldiers and of course the nobles in Europe. By the end of the 12th century, the Crusader kingdoms had grown used to a divided enemy. Egypt was ruled by the Shia Fatimid caliphs in Cairo, while Syria and the Jazira belonged to the Sunni Zengid dynasty of Nur al-Din, two great powers that despised each other almost as much as they despised the Franks. After Nur al-Din's death in 1174, the Zengid lands themselves splintered among quarrelsome princes, and every local emir was busy sharpening his dagger for the next man's back. It was the perfect chaos for the Latin kingdoms to survive in. Then, out of that mess, one man started picking up the pieces faster than anyone thought possible. His name was Saladin. In just over a decade, he swallowed Egypt, crushed the Fatimid Caliphate, outmaneuvered his own Zengid masters, and extended influence into Yemen, and by 1187 controlled a block stretching from the Nile to the Euphrates, the first Muslim ruler in generations to pull that off. Suddenly, all of those armies that had spent decades stabbing each other in the back were marching under the same banner, and that banner was pointed straight at Jerusalem. For the Crusader, the good times were officially over. In 1187, the crowd of Jerusalem sat uneasily on the head of King Guy of Lusignan, a man many nobles considered weak and out of his depth. Real power in the kingdom was scattered among proud, half-independent barons, and none was more dangerous than Raynald of Châtillon, Lord of Transjordan. Raynald was called a pirate in mail armor, because he literally acted like one. In 1182-83, he built ships in the desert, launched them into the Red Sea, and raided Muslim pilgrim ships and ports, all the way to the gates of Medina and Mecca. He treated the Damascus-Egypt caravan road as his personal highway to rob, seizing merchants and pilgrims whenever it suited him, even during official truces. A Crusader prince who plundered like a pirate but wore full armor instead of an eye patch. He had once been imprisoned by the Muslims for 16 years, and when he finally got out, he swore he'd make them pay for every single day. That spring in 1187, a rich caravan of merchants, families, pilgrims traveled from Cairo to Damascus under the promise of safe passage crossing Raynald's land. He didn't care about truces. His men attacked the caravan like wolves, captured the vulnerable, slaughtered escorts, and carried everything off to the vaults of Kerak. When the news reached Saladin, something snapped. This wasn't just politics anymore, it was personal. Saladin swore on the Quran that he will kill Raynald with his own hands. The moment those words left his mouth, the countdown to the Kingdom of Jerusalem's darkest day began. King Guy knew one wrong move could end his kingdom, so he turned to the man he trusted most, Gerard de Ridfort, the 10th Grand Master of the Templars. Gerard hated Muslims with every drop of his blood, and hated Raymond of Tripoli even more, the one Frankish lord who actually understood Saladin. Guy sent the Grand Master as a peace envoy to bring Raymond back to the fold. Big mistake. On the way, Gerard stumbled across a Muslim recon force, and with only 140 knights, decided pride was worth more than common sense. He charged straight into around 1,000 men of Saladin's army at the spring of Cresson. In minutes, the forces of the temple and hospital lay dead in the dust, because they were hospitallers with the Templars. Only Gerard and a handful crawled away. Instead of learning humility, the Grand Master came back burning for revenge. Night after night, he whispered in Guy's ear, "If you stay behind your walls, you are a coward. March out and fight like a king." So, in the blistering heat of July 1187, Guy did exactly that. Against every warning, he took the entire army, over 15,000 men, the largest Christian host ever assembled in the Holy Land, and left the cool springs of Sephoria to relieve Tiberias, which Saladin was deliberately besieging as bait. For 2 days, they struggled through waterless, furnace-hot hills, while Saladin's horsemen closed in on them like wolves circling a wounded herd. By the time they reached the Horns of Hattin, above the Sea of Galilee, the Crusaders were already dying of thirst, lips cracked, horses staggering. Saladin had chosen the ground perfectly. He surrounded them, set fire to the dry grass, and let the smoke and heat do half the killing for him. On the 4th of July 1187, what was left of the army of Jerusalem was annihilated. The true cross, which Christians believed was the cross Jesus died on, was captured. King Guy, taken in chains, and Raynald of Châtillon knelt before Saladin, who finally kept his oath and cut the raider's throat with his own sword. The Templars, half mad with thirst, charged one last time in their white mantles and died exactly where they stood. Some fought so fiercely that Saladin's courtiers begged for the privilege of beheading them personally. Over 200 captured Templars and Hospitallers were butchered on the spot, many by devout scholars and Sufis in his camp who had never swung a sword before, yet considered it the highest religious honor. Gerard IV was one of the very few spared. Saladin kept him in captivity as pawn to force the surrender of the last Templar castles. He was ransomed months later, only to die in another rash charge at Acre in 1189. In a single morning, the Kingdom of Jerusalem lost its only field army, tens of thousands of men gone, dead, enslaved, or scattered. There was no reserve, no second host, nothing. The road to the coast now lay open. City after city surrendered without a fight. Acre, Beirut, Sidon, Jaffa, and on the 2nd of October 1187, exactly 88 years after the First Crusade had taken it, Jerusalem itself opened its gates to Saladin. The cross came down from the dome of the rock, and the Latin East, which had seemed immortal. It was suddenly living on borrowed time. When the news reached Europe, Pope Urban III reportedly dropped dead from grief, according to chroniclers. The Third Crusade answered the call, financed by the hated Saladin tithe, that the Templars themselves collected from every village in Christendom. Two kings sailed east, Philip Augustus of France with a fleet of dozens of ships, and Richard the Lionheart with over 100, loaded so heavy with silver they almost sank. Richard arrived like a storm, immediately installed his friend Robert de Sable as Grand Master, and in 2 years of brilliant, brutal campaigning, he clawed back the entire coast from Acre to Jaffa, even snatched the island of Cyprus as a Christian pirate kingdom. But Jerusalem stayed beyond reach. Twice Richard looked down on the holy city from the hills, and twice he turned away, knowing he lacked the men to hold it. On September 2nd, 1192, he and Saladin signed the Peace of Ramla. The Kingdom of Jerusalem would live on, but as a coastal strip, with its capital of Acre and its heart ripped out. Saladin died 6 months later, exhausted and victorious. For the rest of the 13th century, the Templars poured gold and lives into defending that narrow ribbon of sand and stone between Ascalon and Antioch. At first, Europe still cared. Money and knights kept coming. And then a new power rose on the Nile. The Mamluks. Slave soldiers turned sultans, colder and crueler than Saladin had ever been. And slowly, inevitably, the last Christian castles began counting down the days until the end. Throughout the 13th century, the map told a brutal truth. Ever since Saladin took Jerusalem in 1187, the Christian foothold in the east had been shrinking year after year. The Templars still enjoyed dazzling prestige in Europe, donations still poured in, fresh knights still took the cross. Yet every expedition ended with less territory than it started with, and slowly people in the West began to ask uncomfortable questions. In Egypt in 1250, during the disastrous attack on Mansoura, the English chronicler Matthew Paris records Robert, Count of Artois, raging at the Templars in fury because they refused to charge without the main army. And he mentions, "O old Templar treachery, O long hidden deceit that now comes openly to light. This whole land of the East would have been conquered long ago, if the deceit of the Temple and of others who called themselves religious had not hindered us laymen. The Knights Templar and their accomplices feared that their dominion, fattened by rich profits, might come to an end." During the attack of Mansoura in 1250, the Templars refused to charge with the main army because Robert of Artois wanted to rush ahead before the full Crusader force had crossed the river. The Templars warned that the narrow streets were perfect for an ambush and insisted on waiting for King Louis IX in proper formation. Robert of Artois ignored them, accused them of cowardice, and charged into the city with only a small vanguard, where they were surrounded and wiped out exactly as the Templars had feared. Back in Europe, resentment toward the Templars was growing. Their immense wealth, once admired, now irritated kings and nobles who had previously lavished them with gifts. To many, the order no longer appeared as heroic warrior monks, but as arrogant, tax-exempt landlords steadily swallowing up land and influence. In France, Louis IX himself had to intervene. In 1246, in the charter, he states, "I, Louis IX, King of France, declare that peace has been restored between our dear cousin Theobald IV, King of Navarre, and the Templars, and that the Templars shall never make acquisitions in his county of Champagne and Brie, nor in his fief without his consent." Even small privileges became battlegrounds for the Templars. In 1268, the Templar prior of France, Brother Amaury de la Roche, had to sign a humiliating document. "I, Brother Amaury de la Roche, prior of the Templars in France, declare that Theobald IV had granted us exemptions for the tax on the transport of 40 barrels of wine to Provence, and we accept that if we exceed these 40 barrels, we will pay the tax according to the customs of Provence." Well, donations in this environment still arrived, but so did resentment. Landowners called the Templars greedy. Soldiers called them cautious to the point of cowardice. Treasurers asked them why the treasures kept flowing east when Jerusalem only grew farther away. The order that had been born to protect the Holy Land now had to fight for his very right to exist. At the end of the 13th century, with the Mamluks closing in on Acre itself, living on borrowed time, the Templars clung to one desperate hope, that as long as they still had castles in the east, they still had a reason to be. Because if the last Christian banner fell, the Knights Templars would fall with it, and forever. In conclusion, the saddest thing about the Templars was not their fall. It was how long they kept believing the fall would still be postponed. every year, a few more castles crumbled, another port was lost, another generation of brothers rode east and never came home. Yet every year the wagons still rolled from Paris and London, loaded with silver and hopeful boys who had heard the stories of the legends of the past, of the previous crusades. The order kept telling Europe and kept telling itself that one more effort, one more crusade, one more miracle at the walls of Acre or Ascalon would bring Jerusalem back into Christian hands. And everything maybe would again make sense, but in the end, miracles never came. The sea kept getting wider, and the enemy kept getting stronger. And the question nowadays are asked in the 13th century finally became impossible to silence. What do you do with the richest, proudest, most famous army in the Christian world when the war it was created to fight can no longer be won? The Templars never found an answer, but as we will see in the next episode, someone else will find one for them. This has been a lengthy episode, rich with details, and I thank you very much if you have still clinging on so far. And if you find it interesting, let me know in the comments below. I will see you in the next one. Bye.